Boys and girls, I have another story for you this week, and it's called Beautiful. The story took place a long time ago. A lot of stories I've told have taken place a long time ago, but this one probably happened before I was born. The person in our story's name was Valorie, and Valorie had some unique difficulties. She was born with disabilities. Her body was basically deformed. Her legs didn't work right. Her joints didn't work right. By now, she was 10 to 11 years old, but her body was stunted. And what that means is she remained short. She didn't grow like you normally would. She had spent probably half of her life in the hospital because every so many months the doctors would need to do surgeries, different kinds of surgeries, to try to help make her better so she could walk and use her arms. Without these surgeries, she couldn't do those usual things that you and I generally do. It was sad. And the hospital she went to was in a big city, and it was a big hospital. And in those days, instead of having rooms with one person in them, they had what they called wards. And those wards were a big room, and there was beds every so often all the way around that room. So every time Valorie had to have surgery, she would go stay in the ward. Well, she was very familiar with the hospital because of all her surgeries, and she was a very determined little girl. She could have just curled up in bed and stayed there, and nobody would have faulted her for it at all. I'll tell you just a little bit about Valorie. Valorie could not get out of bed on her own. So in the hospital, oftentimes the nurses were off busy doing things in other wards. And there was nobody to help get Valorie up. So what she would do was she would scoot to the edge of the bed and she would let herself fall off onto the floor. And she'd sit there till she felt a little better. And then Valorie required not one, but 2 canes to walk around. And let me tell you about that. When she would finally push herself with her canes up against the bed till she was in a standing position, when she tried to walk, she kind of would go back and forth, kind of like a penguin does. The reason being is she would have to kind of throw her one leg out in front of her, and then she would put some of her weight on it. She would have to lock her knee so it would be straight out, and then she could pick up the other foot and do the same thing with it. Once she was standing, she could make her way all the way around that ward, and she would go from bed to bed to bed, and she would visit the children. She would help them as best as she could because the disease she had wasn't just in her legs, it was her whole body that had trouble. But she saw no reason to feel sorry for herself. And her parents, they could only come about twice a week to see her, and sometimes she was in the hospital for months at a time. Unfortunately, when her mother came, her mother was a beautiful young lady. She was embarrassed of this daughter of hers that looked so different than all other children. And so if there was other parents there, she kind of would act like she didn't know Valorie. Well, the one person that she knew loved her was her daddy. And when her daddy would come to visit, her whole face would light up with a smile. And she would, as fast as she could in that funny gait of hers, she would make her way to the doorway where her daddy would stand and wait for her to come. And she'd get all the way over to him. She would drop her canes and she would fall into her daddy's arms. And her daddy always said, "Hello, beautiful." He was so kind and so good to her. She couldn't wait for him to come visit. But this is where our story really starts. There was one night, in the middle of the night, matter of fact, it was close to dawn, that the nurses wheeled a little boy, an 8-year-old boy named Billy, into that ward and put him to bed in one of those beds. Now, Billy had the night before been in a terrible car accident. 3 cars had hit each other. Billy's mommy and daddy had not been hurt badly, which was good. They were just bruised and cut. But Billy had been trapped under the car. And they had a hard time. It took the people that came to help, it took them hours to get little Billy from underneath the car. All that weight had been on Billy's legs. Well, before the nurses had brought him up to that ward, to that bed, he had had surgery on his legs, and the doctors were doing everything they could. But the doctor had told his mommy and daddy, "We don't think he'll ever walk again." Well, imagine being 8 and having somebody tell you that you couldn't run, you couldn't jump, you couldn't swing. Well, Billy, this was really hard, like it would be really hard for any little boy or girl. Well, Valorie, she watched little Billy. Every day, little Billy became sadder. When you're big, they call it that you're depressed. Well, he would turn his head to the wall. He didn't want to see anybody. All he wanted was to walk again, but he'd been told he couldn't. So he decided, "They say I can't, so I can't." Well, Valorie, having had many surgeries, she knew that there was a period of time that you didn't feel like getting up, and you had to get better, the pain had to get better. And so she would talk to Billy a little bit, but she kind of left him to get well. She knew all about every child in that ward, and she knew all about Billy. And sometimes Billy would take his hand and he would grab the curtain that went all the way around his bed, and he would pull it so nobody could see him. And he would sit in there by himself, feeling sorry for himself. Well, one day, Valorie, she toddled with her 2 canes over to Billy's bed, and she leaned on the one cane, and she reached up with her hand, and she grabbed that curtain and She pushed it out of the way, and she looked at Billy. And she looked around at the other kids in that ward, and she pointed at Billy, and she said, "That little kid will walk again." Every day when the nurses would come and they wanted to get Billy up, they wanted to put him in a chair, or they wanted to take him in a wheelchair. You know, they wanted him to get up and start playing again. But Billy didn't want to do anything. If he couldn't walk, he didn't want to do anything. So he refused to get up. Well, when Valorie had gone over and pulled that curtain back, she got really close to the bed and she looked at him and she said, "It's time for you to get out of that bed." And he looked at her. I mean, here was this little girl, and of course she was real little for her age, telling him to get out of bed. He said, "Leave me alone. I can't walk. Can't you see that? I can't get up. I'm crippled." Well, Valorie, she let it go that day. But the next day she came and she said, "This is enough of this. You need to get out of bed. It's time." And he looked at her. "I can't. I don't want to. I can't walk." Valorie said, "I'm going to help you learn how to walk again, but you have to get out of bed to do it." Well, finally, she told him, "All right, you roll over on your side." And Billy thought, well, that is something he could do. So he rolled up on his side, and she said, "Okay, Billy, now you take your hand and you push yourself up from laying down up to sitting, and then you let your legs hang over the edge of the bed." Well, you know, if you've laid in bed for weeks, your body doesn't want to do what it's always done. And when he sat up, it was like, oh, and his legs hurt. He said, "I can't. Leave me alone." And then he looked at her, really good for the first time from a sitting up position, and he saw her strangely shaped legs and how her body was bent over. And he said, "You leave me alone. You're weird." And Valorie, she was just trying to help, and she wanted to cry. She knew she looked weird, but there was nothing she could do about it. And she turned to Billy and she looked at him and she said, "Yes, I am weird, but I can't do anything about it. But you can do something about helping so you can walk again." And you know, after that, he didn't fight her. She came every morning. Once he finally was in a sitting position, she had him try to move his legs, which at first they didn't move hardly at all. And then she had him do exercises with his arms to get himself stronger. And finally, when she thought his arms were strong enough, she said, "Okay, today." And she came scooting in front of her, pushing in front of her canes, a walker with wheels on it. And she said, "Okay, Billy, today you're going to reach down here and hold on to the edge of the walker. And I'm going to stand in front of it so it doesn't go anywhere. And you're going to try to stand up." And oh, it was a hard process, and Billy hurt. But every day she told him, I know you can walk again. You're going to walk again, Billy. All you have to do is keep trying." The nurses were amazed, but they all knew Valorie, and they knew what she had overcome. And so they didn't stop her from trying to help Billy. Weeks went by, and every day she worked with Billy till he was standing. Then a week or so later, he was getting some feeling in his legs, and then he was able to shuffle one. This went on for weeks and weeks, till one day Billy actually took a step, and Valorie went, "Look, you did it! You can walk! Look!" And Billy was so excited that from then on he tried his hardest, and every day he could do one step more, till he was actually walking with that walker. His parents were so excited, and the doctor couldn't believe it. Well, it wasn't too many weeks after that Billy didn't need the walker anymore. And the doctor came in and said, "You are going to get to go home, Billy. Your mommy and daddy are going to come pretty soon here, and they left this little suit of clothes for you to wear, and you're going to get to go home." He was so excited, and Valorie was excited for him too, but she knew she would never, unlike Billy, she would never be all well. Billy got dressed behind that curtain, and it wasn't too long till Billy's mommy and daddy came. And Billy was so excited that he walked over to Valorie, and he grinned at her and he said, "Goodbye, goodbye, I can walk, goodbye." Valorie said, "Goodbye." When Billy went down the elevator, started to come out the front of the hospital, all the children that could get up and walk, and Valorie, went to the window, and they looked down to where Billy was, and they waved great big, and Billy waved, and Billy's mommy and daddy helped him get in the back of his car, and then he rolled the window down and he waved at them again, and they were all clapping and so excited because Billy could walk again, and Billy was going home. Well, after Billy drove away, the children all went back to what they were supposed to be doing. And Valorie, she looked around. While she was helping Billy, she felt she was useful in life. And now what was she going to do? And in her heart, she started to feel sorry for herself. And then suddenly, she realized what she was doing. And she turned around to the other kids and she said, "Come on, guys, we've got to help the nurses. It's almost lunchtime." Well, the children that could walk around, one of the things they liked to do was help bring the trays to the kids that couldn't get out of bed. And some of them needed help with things like opening their milk cartons and things that kids could do for each other. Valorie was determined not to feel sorry for herself. Oh, yes, she had a hard, hard life, but Valorie didn't give up on life. She made sure that she did as much as she could for herself. And she didn't feel sorry for herself when the other children, the kids in the ward, never teased her, but the children that didn't know her would make fun of her because she didn't look and she didn't walk like the other kids. Someday, Valorie is going to walk again. Someday, she's going to run again. Someday, when Jesus comes, he's going to give Valorie a brand new body. And he's going to say to her, "Well done, Valorie." You know, Valorie spent what could have been a life of laying on her bed with her face to the wall, helping other people. And when Jesus comes, he's going to reward her with a new body that she can run in. She can play with the other children. It's going to be wonderful when Jesus comes. I'd like you to think about Valorie when things aren't going as you think they should, when it's raining outside and you can't go out and play, when somebody takes the toy you wanted to play with or the book you wanted to read. Think about Valorie, who did everything she could in the body that she had. Be thankful for what you have, boys and girls. And when Jesus comes, I hope to meet Valorie there. And I know Jesus is going to give her a hug and say, "Well done, you good and faithful servant. Well done, Valorie." Thank you, boys and girls. I will see you next week and we'll have another story. Bye-bye now.